Welcome back to the Pursuit podcast. We've been talking to some technologists about how they got into the tech industry without having a degree. We're going to continue and talk to one more technologist today about how they got into tech without a degree. My name's Jessica Rose, and today we're talking with...
Hey, Harry Roberts here. So yeah, I'm a consultant front-end developer and kind of performance engineer from the UK. And I got into tech without a degree about 10 years ago now.
How'd you do that?
I'll try and give you the shortest version of the long story. But so I kind of got into web design by accident. I wanted to be a graphic designer. I thought it was kind of like a cool thing to be. And so when I was about 15, 16, me and my best friend at the time, we started making, we actually had commercial projects. We had actual clients. So we were doing flyers and logos and stuff for local companies. And at some point I was like, oh, we're so good at this. We should totally have a website so we can get more clients. So I volunteered to learn how to code, and I taught myself HTML, CSS. And then by the time I was sort of 16, 17, and getting to that age where you need to start looking at which university to go for, it was kind of a bit, I didn't know if I needed it. So I bought a domain name. My website actually turns 10 this year.
And you've kept the same domain name the whole time.
Well, yeah, you don't end up called CSS Wizardry in your late 20s by accident. So I bought that when I was 17 because I thought it'd be really cool. And I started blogging there and writing things, and it kind of went from there. It was weird. Because of how much I was writing things, I was starting to learn even more. I think the best way to learn something is to teach it back to someone else. And then aside from that, my parents were like, look, you need to start applying to universities soon. You need to start going and having interviews at universities. And I was like, look, I want to be a web developer, and I don't think I need university. So my dad, who, they weren't forceful. My parents have always given me a lot of autonomy, but my dad was like, look, just do us a favor. Apply for 3 jobs and apply for 3 universities, so at least we know that you've given both options kind of equal opportunity, I guess. So I applied for 3 universities. I applied for 3 jobs. So I got offered this job. It was, I think in 2008, it had just been voted the best web design company in the UK. And they offered me a job. I went for my interview when I was like 17. I was a nervous wreck, first proper interview. But the guy who I met with, still a really good friend to this day, he just got a thing. He spotted, sounds very modest, but I guess he spotted a bit of talent, a bit of drive, a bit of enthusiasm, and just must have thought, look, we can get this kid. He's 17. We can mold him. We can do whatever. We can make him into a proper developer. And yeah, so he employed me as like a straight web developer, not a junior, not an apprentice, just my job title was developer, same sort of salary bracket as everybody else. And I just thrived. I just could not believe how lucky I was. And then a few interesting things happened after that. These are a couple of my biggest braggadocious stories. One of the universities I'd applied to, I actually ended up declining. I said, look, I've just got my dream job. Like, I really appreciate the offer of coming to your university, but I've got a job that I absolutely love. So I won't be attending. And then 3 months later, I started noticing traffic coming from that university's website to my website. And I followed the kind of trail back. And it turned out that my blog was listed as recommended reading for the course that I'd actually applied for.
How cool was that?
Yeah, it was insane. So I was like, I was just a bit, at first I was a bit kind of, oh my goodness, I nearly paid thousands to go on this course, and they would have just sent me back to my own website. But I think what this really marks for me is, in my career, if I was to attribute it to one specific thing, it's having that blog. It's having a public display of what you know, a public record of your kind of progress. It's that anyone who asks me how they should progress in tech, or what they can do to further their career, I nearly always tell them the same thing. It's just get a blog, write everything down. It was absolutely instrumental for me. And yeah, 10 years later, here I am.
That's fantastic. Speaking to other people, we've heard a really, really wide range of advice for folks getting into tech without a degree. Folks who've been successful off of networking say, oh, wow, networking, you have to network. And you're saying, like, do you know what? For me and from my perspective, it's all about writing and learning through writing.
Yeah, I mean, networking is absolutely correct, but it depends where you live. So if you live somewhere that's a little more remote, where you don't have meetups, it's so much harder to network. When I was getting into tech 10 years ago, that I was aware of, there weren't any meetups. So absolutely, I guess, for people who are not kind of veterans at this point, I guess networking is going to be a huge part of it as well. But yeah, certainly when I was starting out, the blog was instrumental.
And with the magic of the internet, it's not just folks who don't necessarily have access to these real life communities, but also folks who would prefer not to spend that much time and money getting around and hanging out with people in real life. You've got incredible opportunities to network online.
Exactly. Yeah. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. You can just be comfortable. You can do your own stuff. You don't need to be in a situation that, like you say, might be difficult to get to physically, or it kind of also what it does is it gives a real chance to kind of neutralize everything. So it means that when you're reading someone's blog post, all you know is, wow, this person's smart. And you've got no opportunity to like inadvertently judge them based on, I don't know, the way they carry or conduct themselves. It kind of normalizes everything, and you're basically just being. I find it's a really good way to read someone's blog and just think, I know nothing about this person. I don't know what kind of music they're into. I don't know. I've got no way of knowing about them as a person yet. What I do know is they're really smart. And that is a great kind of, start, I guess.
So sort of a broadcast channel where you're not having to engage with everybody who's taking your message away, which has the potential to eliminate some biases.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You've put it way more succinctly than I did. I got a friend, actually, I won't name him, but he just wrote an article. It was kind of like not a throwaway article, because that sounds kind of disrespectful, but it was a bit of it wasn't like one of those big Ethan Marcotte, responsive design style articles. It won't be read in 10 years' time, but it was cool. It was very, very smart stuff he was doing. And it just so happened that a hiring manager at Facebook ended up reading this article and reached out to my friend and said, hey, look, you don't know me, but I just stumbled upon your blog, really like the kind of stuff you're writing. Do you want to interview for us?
Cool.
And that was exactly, because you've got no idea who's reading either, do you? You've got no idea who's out there, who's consuming your stuff.
And I think that might be a valuable one as well. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. We've been talking about how valuable having a technical blog has been for you and for your friend. Congratulations to your friend. What kinds of things would you recommend? So how would you say, hi, I'm a junior developer, an aspiring developer, an aspiring technologist. I really want to get into tech. I want to start my blog. Harry, what do I do first?
Oh, amazing. I would recommend, you're a junior dev, you just wanting to get into it. The first thing you're probably going to have is a bit of imposter syndrome, or a bit of anxiety about, who's going to read it. And I always battle the second one with logic, right? Which is, well, if you don't write a blog, literally nobody can read it. Just by having a blog, at least you're increasing the chance by an infinite amount. So a lot of people say, oh, well, if I write a blog, no one will read it. Well, if you don't write a blog, definitely no one will read it, because they can't. So just start, and don't put any pressure on yourself. Don't pressure yourself to write an article a week for 52 weeks, because you're going to get demotivated. You'll grow to resent it. And the quality will suffer, right? So just write about things you discover. So I was working with a developer recently. He's a very, very good developer, but he's very junior. And he taught me this amazing little trick, this thing you can do in NPM, which I'd never seen before. And I was like, I've been doing this for over 10 years now. Like, I've been doing it professionally for 10 years, but I've never seen this thing before. It's a tiny little thing. I was like, mate, that's the perfect thing. That's exactly what you should be blogging about. Because if I'd have Googled this problem and found your blog, I would have been like, amazing. I didn't know it's that simple to solve. This person knows more about this than I do. And like I say, no one knows that that's a junior developer behind that keyboard.
I think that that's a really good point, that really basic stuff you wouldn't think is that important, can be a fantastic way to draw people to your blog.
Absolutely.
One thing I might suggest is making sure you have Google Analytics set up, or making sure you have another analytics stream to see where you're getting traffic.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and learn about sort of who's coming and who's reading what, and who's basically who's consuming your stuff, and optimize for that, or conversely optimize for whoever isn't coming. Try and widen the net.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think certainly when you're starting out, write about things that are short and simple, that are very factual. So I think if you're starting out, it's going to be very hard to write a forcefully opinionated piece about, why tabs are the devil or anything like that. I think that's going to be quite a risky and difficult thing to start out with. Especially
when tabs are the one true way forward.
Oh no, we shouldn't have gone there, should we?
We'll do a special time where we politely argue about tabs and spaces.
Yeah, save that for another time. But yeah, so absolutely start off with really simple factual stuff. And there's always stuff like anytime you write a blog post, you've got kind of the trolls, you've got the people who come out of the woodwork to tell you you're wrong, or it's a bad idea, or it's a disgrace. If you're starting out, don't write anything that could sort of ruffle any feathers. It's not your responsibility to avoid the trolls. They just shouldn't be out there, but you do have to kind of guard yourself a little bit. So in order to not get discouraged early on in your kind of blogging career, I guess, stick to the safe stuff. Like, this is how you do this in NPM, rather than saying, oh, I wish NPM was more like this, which could be a little more, I don't want to say controversial because it shouldn't be, but I do really think that kind of tip-based approach to blogging for someone starting out makes it really easy to get into, makes it very approachable. And it's also, like you say with the analytics thing, it's very kind of Google friendly. It's the kind of stuff that people will land on via Google searches. And a lot of people, when either two things happen. They'll land on the site and think, oh, this solves my problem, perfect, and move on. Or they will land on the site and think, oh, that's a smart tip. I wonder if there are any more tagged with NPM that I could learn. And it becomes kind of sticky and people hang around. So yeah, that's kind of my initial advice to people who want to start making a name for themselves. Because I've never landed on anyone's site, read an amazing article and thought, but I don't know if they have a degree, so I don't know if I can trust them or not.
That's a really fantastic point. So one other thing I'd add, and I've just done a couple webinars for junior devs and junior technologists and doing portfolio sites. So I'm just going to plug, make sure you've got your contact details really visible.
Yes.
Make sure there's information about what kinds of things you do and what kinds of things people can pay you for. Very, very visible.
Yeah, good shout. Yeah, that's a great idea. Just make it obvious that, hey, look, I write about this stuff quite often. I'm available for hire, or I'm doing this, or I'm available to speak at meetups or whatever. Yeah, always have an end game as well, I guess. That's a really good point. Like, make sure there's a point to it all.
Yeah, and make sure it's easy to get in touch with you. A lot of people hate mail to links. I hate mail to links. Give me a form. Give me some way I can access your email address without a mail to link.
Mm-hmm.
That could just be me.
Yeah, no, a lot of people are the same. I'm guilty of not having a form on my site because it's just statically hosted. But you're right. Just make it super easy for people to do that next thing you want them to do, right? Whether it's signing up to a newsletter or pinging you an email.
Buying a t-shirt.
Yeah. And then another thing as well, after you've got your content written, a lot of people say, well, I don't have any followers on Twitter yet. No one's going to read it. Just pass that article off to someone like Smashing Mag and say, hey, look, I've just written this article about whatever. I really think your readers might be interested in the content. And people like Smashing Mag, Vitaly and the team are absolutely wonderful for amplifying voices kind of indiscriminately. They don't just share the already famous people. They're really great at amplifying voices. So just ping them and say, hey, look, written this article. I really think it might be of interest to your readers. All of a sudden, boom, you've got a tweet in front of hundreds of thousands of people with your content in it.
And that's a fantastic point as well. You don't just have to develop content for your own site. Once you get a little bit of a backlog, you can prove that you've written some interesting things. You could take a look at pitching.
Yeah. And then get paid for it. Even better. Win-win.
Not a fantastic amount, but it's enough to buy some beer and coffee.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you say, it's just promotion. It's a great way of sort of getting away from your own sandbox, I guess, and getting in front of a bigger audience. One thing I would generally say is don't post on Medium as a sole kind of outlet because, and this is fairly anecdotal, it's not necessarily scientific, but the amount of times people say to me, oh, I read this really great article on Medium. They never actually say, I read this really great article by Jane Doe. They always say on Medium. And I think that posting on Medium, it kind of loses your own brand and no one really associates the article with a person. They usually always associate it with that platform. So, cross-post on Medium.
And yeah, Google has said that it won't hurt your search rate rankings to cross-post on Medium.
Yeah, exactly. So I would try and keep everything under your own brand. Because a lot of people, junior developers who ask me these questions and say, oh, well, shall I just set up a blog on Medium? I usually answer with, well, no, because then it's Medium's content. No one remembers that you wrote it. They remember that it was on Medium. And also, having your own website, every developer should have their own website, in my opinion, because it's your sandbox. It's your place to think, oh, I want to learn service worker this weekend, so I'm going to do it on my own website. And it's the greatest way to kind of expand. And it's a permanently there side project that you can use to sharpen your tools, I guess.
So these are all really fantastic tips for getting a technical blog together, which is what you really said you credit for your success.
Absolutely.
But getting into tech without a degree, it's not always incredibly easy. Have there been any times in your career where not having a degree you felt has held you back or presented some kind of barrier?
Yeah, I mean, I will be completely honest. Once there has been one notable occasion, and only one occasion, notable or otherwise, that not having a degree affected me. So every job I've interviewed for, except one, has asked me about degrees. So in 10 years worth of employment, only one company ever asked me about qualifications.
Wow.
And because the last couple of interviews I've done, I was quite fortunate in that the interviewer already knew who I was because of my blog and stuff like that. So they already knew I had the sort of requisite skills. They knew I had the and what it takes to do the job. But then what happened is years ago, about, I would say maybe 6 years ago, I got an email from someone at Apple.
Okay.
Yeah, over in the US saying, would you like to interview for Apple? And I was like, geez, yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. So I had my first phone interview with them. They were, like I say, over in the States, and I was here in England. And the phone interview went really, really well. Couldn't have gone much better, really. We left that on a really exciting kind of like, oh, it's great. I'm going to put you through to the next interviewer. We'll schedule a call for next week, and that'll be a more technical interview. So then the next week rolls around, and I get on the call with someone at Apple. And not the first question they asked, but quite early in the call, maybe like in the first 5 minutes of the call, they just said, oh, and what was your degree in? And I feel like it's a very US-centric thing, is having a degree. It seems to be mentioned a lot more by American developers than it is over here in Europe. They said, what was your degree in? The assumption that I had a degree. Rather than asking, do you have a degree? It was more of a case of, you must have a degree. What was it in? And I just said, oh, I don't actually have one. Like I didn't go to university at all. And they said, look, we just cannot, there's no way we can hire you without a degree. It's our minimum requirements is that you do need a degree to work here. And with the visa kind of stuff, they're going to ask you about degrees. And if you don't have one, it's going to be hard to relocate. You need 12 years of experience to replace 1 4-year degree. So instantly, the entire interview process shut down right there. They were just like, look, there's no point even continuing. It's not going to happen. So that was the only time it's affected me was with that sort of transatlantic situation.
I think that's potentially an important point for those listening, that not having a degree shouldn't be a bar for getting into the industry or doing amazing work. But there are a lot of places where not having a degree could hold you back. Visas to the US are much more difficult. To my knowledge, visas to Japan are nearly impossible without a degree. So there are reasons why getting a degree, even though it is expensive and even though it is a large time investment, may be long-term what's best for someone.
Yeah, it depends where you see your kind of career going. If you do see yourself traveling around, you want to live overseas, you want to relocate somewhere, then that's probably a time when it might be more useful for the travel aspect rather than the actual career aspect. I'm really, really, I'm the luckiest guy alive, but I work for myself now, so it's never been a question that anyone's had for me, employment-wise, visa-wise. It's just I'm traveling on business. I'm not resettling anywhere, relocating anywhere. And I'm approaching the 12 years of experience now anyway, because I'm getting old.
So it's a good time to call Apple back and be like, hey, you want to get back in touch?
Maybe one day. I'm absolutely loving the self-employment thing at the moment, but at least I do now know about the kind of that kind of requirement, that amount of experience. So that's fast approaching. As far as employers asking for qualifications, literally never happened apart from that one time where it was more about the visas. I've never had a hiring manager ask me anything about, did you have a degree? What did you get in your A-levels? Anything like that. It's never even come up in conversation. In fact, I don't even know what I got in my A-levels. A-levels, for any non-British listeners, the exams you do, you study your A-levels between 16 and 18, and then after you've done your A-levels, you then go on to university and do your degree. I still don't know what I got in my A-levels, because by the time they were announcing the results, you go and pick up your results. I was working in my first tech job. I loved my job, my new job. I'd been in it for like a month. I loved it so much that I flat out refused to take a day off work to go back to the high school and pick up my results. I was like, look, I'm not voluntarily taking a day off to come and pick up results that I don't need. So I still, to this day, have no idea what I got in my A-levels.
Oh, that would have been eating away at me for decades.
Oh, no, you've said that. Now it's eating away at me.
Oh, no, sorry.
I don't even know how one would go about getting them after 10 years. But yeah, I just didn't even bother picking them up because nobody asked for them. I was offered a job before I'd even finished my A-levels. I'd certainly found that people in the companies, people inside companies, have never cared about what I did academically.
And this seems like a really good time to mention that this isn't necessarily the experience that everyone can look forward to trying to get into technology without a degree. Being swooped up immediately based on your writing or based on the great things you've done is fantastic, but it's not necessarily sort of the standard route a lot of people are going to take without a degree, is it?
Absolutely not. I mean, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of investment. I was just one of the very lucky few that when I was quite young, I discovered this is what I want to do, right? This is what I want to do as a career. So I had a great head start on a lot of people. That definitely helped. It's not the simplest or most straightforward route in, and it won't work out for everyone. I wouldn't have thought.
So you were talking a bit about being self-employed, being your own boss, being a consultant. Can you talk a little bit about how you moved from that first job into this, and give our listeners the sort of broad strokes of what it's like being a consultant and working for yourself?
So my first job, my first full-time job in tech lasted maybe a couple of years. Moved from that company to that was a company like your standard, not standard. It was remarkable actually. It was an amazing company, but it was your kind of web design company, right? Lots of clients, that kind of stuff. Spent a couple of years there and moved to a much smaller company with a friend of mine, where we were kind of the in-house dev team for a VC.
Oh, cool.
Yes and no. It was interesting. It was a very quiet couple of years. There wasn't much. The guy who founded the company, the VC who founded like the funding company, was honestly about 3 years ahead of the curve. At the time, there just weren't many people applying for funding, whereas now it'd be through the roof. So we had a kind of interesting couple of years there, which is when I actually started writing the most. Actually, my writing ramped up quite a lot in those couple of years.
Okay. So having the information-rich environment gave you even more things to write and talk about.
Yeah, and also the downtime as well, because we really weren't that busy at this company. It gave me a lot of chance to research things. So it was when CSS3 was coming out, and I literally was one of the first people to write about border radius. How crazy is that to think that was like there was a time before border radius? And then, interestingly, what happened is now I do think this is important advice for people. At the end of this work at this VC firm, I'd written enough and I was writing enough that I was getting recognized, a couple of thousand followers on Twitter, maybe 100,000 monthly readers to the blog.
Oh.
And I was thinking, right, yeah, it was crazy. It was going really well. Because I was just hammering it, right? I think in 2013, I wrote over 50 articles. And it was just, because I was just going for it. I was like, everything I've learned, boom, write it down. And it was just link bait. People were just swarming to the site. So it was at this point I was thinking, right, well, this is it. After this VC job, I'm going to go and work for myself, and I'm going to go freelance. What ended up happening is someone from Sky, the British broadcasting company, which is actually BBC. What I meant was the broadcasting company in England called Sky. Someone from there got in touch, saying, hey, look, do you want to interview for a senior position at this company? And I was like, yeah, it sounds exciting. No one at Sky asked anything about qualifications. I was 20 years old at the time, and they gave me a senior position. And that job taught me how much I didn't know. I would have been woefully underprepared for freelance life. I would have never become a consultant if I hadn't worked at Sky. The exposure to such a different environment, such a large environment, made me realize that before that, I knew nothing about process. I didn't really know anything about company politics. I didn't know anything about working in-house, working on products. So if I'd have gone freelance instead of going to Sky, my life would be very, very different. I wouldn't be speaking. I wouldn't be doing consultancy, because I wouldn't have picked up enough skills. I would have kind of bowed out of employment, of full-time employment, way too soon. And I just, every day, thankful that I decided to go for this job at Sky, because it was formative. So one thing I do try and recommend to people is that if your end game or your ultimate result is to work for yourself, that's amazing and it's very liberating. But make sure you just expose yourself to as much as you can beforehand, just to leave you better prepared.
What kinds of environments would you recommend people have as not necessarily a hard checklist, but definitely spend some time in these before you go?
Oh, that's a good one. So I would say traditional web design company, absolutely, because there you will learn the hardships of working late, deadlines, whimsical clients. These are all things that you would love to avoid, but they are really formative things. So a couple of years in an agency, you'll have a ton of fun, right? Because there's always like, beer on tap, or they'll have like a PS4 in the corner. It's kind of the stereotype exists. It's an environment I'm glad I'm not a part of anymore, just because I'm way suited to different environments than that. But get in an agency for a while, learn about client services, because basically when you work in an agency, you're doing work for a client. If you end up in that environment, do everything you can to end up in meetings with that client, because what it'll do is it'll teach you about salesy, businessy type stuff. Try to avoid being kind of a silent developer who's kept in the back, right? Yeah, definitely try and work in an agency for a little while. Maybe a startup might be interesting for... I never actually worked in a proper startup, but that'll expose you to a bunch of stuff. And then absolutely try working product. go and work for someone like, in the UK, someone like the BBC or Sky or Sainsbury's, one of the supermarkets, someone like that who've got a lot of stability, so they're not as risky as a startup, but you will learn loads of things about how to look after a code base for 5 years. You'll learn things about you learn way more about business because you will learn that you're part of the business now. So absolutely, try work in an agency, try work in a product environment. You will get a really good spread of everything there. So there's only really 2 types of role you need, I would say, to leave yourself very well equipped.
That sounds really interesting because it sounds like the way you've framed these 2 different environments is really looking at a lot of the non-technical skills you learn along the way. You mentioned working closely with coworkers around tight deadlines. You talked about working with unreasonable clients. You talked about coming in to a large organization that has established process and learning about business at a larger level.
Oh, yeah.
And that's interesting.
Yeah, no, I guess inadvertently what I was saying there is the tech, honestly, it doesn't matter. It changes so quickly. The tech's the easiest bit to learn. So I would deprioritize that. Don't worry about, I need to learn React or I need to learn Vue. If and when I ever end up in a hiring position again, I will very rarely hire based on tech knowledge. I would hire based on, hey, look, clients got in touch and they're not happy with this. What do we do in the intervening sort of week to try and rectify it? Or we've got this huge launch on this date and things are behind schedule. What would you do to try and solve that? And because the code to do that is fairly immutable, it's like you could solve it pretty much the same way every time. One thing I definitely look for in other developers, in peers, isn't their technical ability. It's about how they would just generally attack a problem.
So if you talk about were I in a hiring situation again, I'd be looking for these underlying problem-solving skills and willingness to learn and willingness to address things. Mm-hmm. If you were going to give a message to employers out there to say, hey, here's what we need to be looking at, what kind of message would you send them about hiring?
Absolutely hire more juniors, because this can sound really awful, right? But if I'm talking to an employer, I will talk business, right? Juniors command lower salaries, obviously, because they're junior. So from a business point of view, it makes sense that you're saving money, right? But also the great thing about juniors is they're not going to be set in their ways. They're not going to have bad habits. They're going to be malleable. They will fit your process a lot more easily. But at the same time, they will also be much more enthusiastic. So they'll be more keen to challenge that process and say, hey, look, does anyone know that we could actually do this instead? I've been reading about this recently. They'll just bring a bunch of enthusiasm into the team at a lower price point. That sounds horrible to say it, but if you're an employer, that's going to be something you'll look out for. But then the absolute requirement is they must be well supported. So don't just hire a load of juniors and think, oh, great, cheap workforce. You need responsible seniors to sort of nurture them and make sure they're safe and sort of mentored in that environment. But yeah, if you're an employer, don't go for expensive senior developers who are entrenched and like set in their ways and jaded and miserable. Go for enthusiastic juniors who are just keen to adapt.
I don't know what the verbal version of an enthusiastic +1 is. I don't think I can do it out loud. But that's such a valuable point, that getting in these junior perspectives, you get this enthusiasm, this willingness to learn, and it's really your responsibility to support them and help them continue learning.
Yeah, and that's really fun. Like, you get to mentor someone. If you're a senior member of staff, you'll get someone who knows things you don't. Because, I mean, junior and senior basically just implies how long have you been doing this. It doesn't imply knowledge or skill necessarily. There are junior developers out there who know a million times more React than I do. But just because I'm older, I would be called a senior. And I don't think that's correct sort of naming, is it? Junior and senior. It's basically been doing it a long time, hasn't been doing it a long time. Everyone's got something to teach everyone.
And I think as well, looking at junior and senior, it can often talk about not the amount of time you've spent in industry. I'm always really cautious about that. But the time you've spent in industry actively engaged and learning. I've ran into some really fantastic people who've worked in really toxic workplaces where there's no either professional or personal progression. It gets really challenging. I think that saying someone's senior means that they've done quite a bit of skills development, and much like you said, they're ready to start passing those skills on to people.
Yeah, and that's what they should be doing. It's a responsibility. I personally know someone, a very good friend of mine, who he was hired as a junior developer, but his job title never, unfortunately, in this case, never reflected that. So he ended up working for a firm where no one really understood how much support and input and guidance he needed. And he didn't need it because he was no good. He needed it because he was literally a junior developer, right? And because it was never really formalized, he kind of got a little forgotten, should we say, in places. And it really affected his morale. It made him think he was the problem. And it kind of, led to that thought of, well, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. It's like, well, you are. It's just that no one's supporting you through it. And it's the responsibility of the business. If you get junior developers in, make sure everyone knows they're junior and make sure you've got a set way of ensuring they're being looked after.
Even something as casual and ad hoc as the buddy system. Say, you know what, this is the person that you don't report to, but you can come to with any questions.
Yeah.
It can be so valuable.
Yeah, you're so right. It's so much more than nothing, isn't it? Just even having someone where, do you know what, I need to go and get a coffee and talk through some frustrations. And just having that, even as informal as a buddy system, is a great start.
So I do a lot of work with non-traditional junior talent, which is the most exciting thing. I love it to bits. And I always advocate, both companies and individuals, especially for junior developers, that you need a mentor or champion internally. So somebody who works with you that you can go and chat to when you have a question or something's wrong, but also having an external mentor. Companies are fantastic. You may work at a great company, but having somebody externally who has your genuine best interest at heart before the company can often be really important.
Yeah, that sounds great. Having someone who you can just say, look, how's your day at work today? Anything you struggled with, anything that you want some input on, that would be amazing to have that.
Yeah, folks who are senior in your job can never counsel you to quit your job.
Yeah, and they're obviously going to be torn because they've got their higher ups to keep happy, they've got their juniors to keep happy, and it's never going to be fully impartial, is it? So I think that's an amazing point you've made, is having someone externally who's got no kind of horse in the race is going to be a great sort of sounding board as well.
Even when I'm a manager, so when I manage teams, I'm very, very firm with people. It's like, hi, here's my advice for you, but you also need someone externally to talk about this because here are my biases.
That's a great point.
You know what? This has been a fantastic conversation, and we're going to go ahead and wrap it up just to keep it at a bite-sized, roughly 30 minutes for podcast. But in passing, what would you want to say? You're talking directly to the dear listener who's just getting into tech, who cares so much about it. They're so excited, but they don't have a degree. What kind of reassurances or what kind of advice do you want to leave them with?
Wow, a lot of responsibility here. Well, a lot of people I know don't have degrees. A lot of people I know who do have degrees don't attribute any of their success to that degree. Most people have learned more on the job than they have in a classroom. So don't stress the lack of degree, but instead replace it with genuine enthusiasm, kind of a thirst to keep moving. If you're a junior looking to get into tech, it's going to be an interesting ride for you, but it's tons of fun. And just make sure that everything you're doing kind of leads towards this. I enjoy my job. I love my job. And as soon as you stop feeling that, if you're in an environment where you think, do you know what, I'm starting to resent my job, start looking elsewhere. It's a developer's market right now. And I don't want to encourage disloyalty, but honestly, just keep moving. There's somewhere out there for you, and just keep your sights on the next thing and just sprint past everyone else.
You might not want to encourage disloyalty, so I'll jump in. Once the hard part is getting that first job and getting that big chunk of experience. Once you've got that, you've got a market with a great deal of demand for you. If you're being mistreated, if you're being harassed, if you're someplace where you're losing the will to keep going, quit your job. Well, wait. Get a new job. Yeah. Quit your job.
No.
If you're being underpaid, quit your job.
I know people in this exact situation where they get their first job and they think, well, I'm so lucky to have my first job and I'm going to stay here. And they stay there for years and they burn out. And all of a sudden, with only one job's worth of experience, they think that being a web developer sucks. And it's like, no, just please don't display any loyalty, because it's a business thing, right? Your company is there and it's a very personal relationship when you've got a job, when you work with people, but it's a business transaction, right? Your time is being purchased to provide a service for someone else. There's no real loyalty there. And if you're not enjoying it, get out. Go and find the next place. Go and find the place where you will enjoy yourself. And if that's not the right place, go to the next one.
Absolutely.
Just keep that enthusiasm. Honestly, I've not had a bunch of jobs in 10 years, but I certainly didn't hang around any longer than I needed to. I didn't stay anywhere because of a sense of loyalty or a sense of obligation. I was like, do you know what? This one's better for me now. This one's more money. This one's more opportunity. This one's going to be more interesting. Leave employers by saying, hey, look, had a great time. Thanks for looking after me. But I've got to do me and I've got to move on. So yeah, just keep that enthusiasm. Replace your degree with enthusiasm and you'll go much, much further than unenthusiastic people who've got qualifications falling out of their ears.
Fantastic point to end on. Harry, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.